want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
We are the Mad Men of Masculinity.
Your home for healthy masculinity. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
Hey, y'all.
Voila!
You know what time it is.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kirk M. Samuels.
And I am Jason B. Kendrick.
And we are the Mad Men of Masculinity.
That's right. We're just real men having real conversations for you.
For you.
It's getting real tonight, man.
Yeah,
he dropped this bomb on me. I'm like, dude, I don't know.
We getting real, man.
Getting real, man.
We getting real.
He's gonna try to assuage my white guilt.
You know, man. We could be popcorn all the time, and we could talk about light and fluffy stuff, and we could sit here and complain about whatever troubles of life. From a man's point of view, we can sit here and talk about dating and women and all those kinds of things are great and all that kind of stuff, but sometimes, man, especially, while we have a platform, the fact that we're here, we're alive, we got a platform, we out here, 12:20 a.m. in the Mile High City, KLDC, and on the interwebs everywhere. Man, sometimes we got to get real, man. Sometimes we got to talk about real stuff that's happening in the world, real stuff that's happening kind of in our community, real stuff that we see and real problems that we have out here, man. And sometimes we just got to get real with that, man.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of those biggest ones. I mean, it started at the start of this. I mean, it was a big issue at the beginning of this nation. It was a big issue at the start of, the quote unquote freest nation in the world. Yeah. And it's something we're still dealing with. And I mean, it happens daily. A lot of it, I think, is, just ingrained, but it's one of those things that's taught. And it's so irritating because no child is born that way. They don't have those prejudices. They don't have those judgments. But then you just in the collective consciousness or whatever, it's just there. So it keeps getting repeated. It keeps getting retaught, and it's a tough subject to talk about because it impacts so many people. Yeah. There's so many people that are impacted by it, daily.
Yeah. And so getting into it today, we're talking about racism in America. Mm-hmm. Boom. And, we on this show here, not only are we over the airwaves, here in Denver, Colorado and Colorado kind of Front Range area, but we're also online, YouTube, Facebook, all those kinds of things, and of course, podcasts. And I say all that to say that if you happen to click on YouTube or Facebook, you will see that, one of us is one of these things is not like the other. You will see that I'm a black man and Jason B. Kendrick is a non-black man. And by what culturally speaking American standards, I'm a black dude, you're a white dude. And so, we Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder, what I'm saying? Ebony and Ivory up in this bad boy, and we make harmony, with the topics and the things that we try to accomplish with this show, with this platform and helping people and home for healthy masculinity and all these other kind of things, man. If we're going to be men, we got to talk about real stuff in our country, man. We got to talk about real circumstances, real issues, and all these kinds of things, and make things okay to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, as a quote unquote white man coming from the South, I mean, growing up in that area, it was very prevalent, and it was just this recycled training. Everybody just they chose sides, and then they had a lot of that past teaching of, well, this race is bad, this race is good, or this race is different than us, and we gotta hate them. And I mean, even as a kid in Georgia, I remember getting bullied for being a white kid in a mostly black school, and being an Army brat and traveling the world. I was fortunate enough to be in DoD schools, military schools that were the rainbow. I mean, we had every color out there, so I had a better education than some of the folks that may be isolated and don't know. But what I did find the most interesting is being a little more aware, especially moving around as much as I did, having as much experience with different races and nationalities and stuff, was watching, especially in Alabama, the old white rednecks and the old black rednecks who hated each other, but had more in common than anybody else because they lived basically the same life, but because all their life they were trained to dislike each other and to just be prejudiced towards each other. They didn't even open up the conversation.
Yeah. I grew up in D.C. I grew up because I'm black. I grew up with a black family. And I experienced racism my whole life, and so living out here in Colorado for the past 25 years, whatever it's been, 24, 25 years. There's not a lot of chocolate chips on the cookie out here, as they might say. I mean, there's some diversity and all that kind of stuff, but compared to DC, DC is chocolate city for real. But at the same time, especially over these last several years, I've grown close to you, and I trust you inherently as a brother. You're one of the closest people in my life, to be honest with you. And so I have no doubts being able to have open and upfront conversation, and I can vouch for you in terms of your heart and all those kinds of things. And so, man, I would not like to have an open conversation about a sensitive topic like this with pretty much next to anybody else, more than you in terms of just trust and safety and all that kind of stuff. And, as we talk about these things, first of all, I think we got to take off the table some level of sensitivity in terms of, why he say it like that, or why he say it like that, or how come he say this and how come he say that, and all this other kind of stuff. And, in order to have these conversations, especially as men, to have tough conversations, we almost have to be willing to take some level of the culturally sensitivity, kind of politically correct, all that other kind of stuff off the table in order to have these conversations. Now, that being said, we are airwaves and all that kind of stuff. And, if you say something too crazy, I might reach across here and punch you in your throat, but, and vice versa. But at the same time, so yeah, I mean, I think as much as I inherently completely trust you in this conversation, I think on every side of this issue, regardless of where you land, I think we have to be willing to take some level of sensitivity off the table in terms of whether it be ignorance, whether it be verbiage. I don't know what it's like to be a white man. You don't know what it's like to be a black man. And so maybe I'll say something that, might come off a certain way, even though I mean it a different way or whatever. And so that I think we should establish that right up front.
No, I agree. And I think when you're dealing with sensitive topics like this, you have to have a willingness to be open, and to have a hard conversation. You got to take your heart off the sleeve, turn the nerves down a little bit and the sensitivity down a little bit and be willing to hear these things. Because in all my experience and all the black friends I've had over through my lifetimes, being willing to listen to their experience, and it's something that I don't experience except secondhand. I've been in the car when we got pulled over and had to do hey, I'm the white guy, officer. Let me talk to you, and basically save my friends from maybe more prejudice or being treated worse. But it's something that you have to be willing to, especially as a white person and a white man in this country, be willing to listen to with an open ear and an open mind and an open heart, because this is not your experience. And it's something that we go around every day. And if you're not open to it, you think, oh, well, that doesn't happen that much, or these things don't happen that much, or they're just exaggerating. And it's not your experience. You don't see the looks. You don't see the people crossing the street, the ladies clutching their bag. You don't see these things because you're not of that ethnicity. And so it's just not your experience. So you have to be willing to open your ears, open your heart, and go, okay, maybe it's not my experience, but it's somebody else's experience. I need to listen and understand what their experience is, because without having that experience, you might be, disbelieving and say, well, I never see that. Well, of course you don't see that. You're not in their shoes.
And I think you couldn't have said that better, man. It's really easy to discount somebody else's experience because it's not yours. And I think, a lot of times we can do that a lot in this country, whether it be gender-based, whether it be, sexual preference, orientation, whether it be race or whatever, socioeconomic and all those kinds of things. We think it's easy to think that something can't be if we've never experienced it. We got to be open enough in all of these different areas to accept somebody else's truth as their truth, even if it's not your truth. And, in some ways, I think truth is relative based on experience. I think there's very few universal truths. And so we got to be willing to respect somebody else's truth and respect their experience, and to say, okay, I never experienced it. Maybe even I don't agree with it, or I have no frame of reference, or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, okay, if you say so from your perspective, then cool.
Yeah. And that's sometimes the hardest part, is to open your eyes and go, hey, it may not be my experience. I may not have seen it as much, and maybe I may be a little skeptical, but I need to be aware and be open enough to go, well, this is his experience, and listen to it from a place of wanting to learn, not being skeptical, but just being open to, well, this is their experience. This is his experience, and this is what he has dealt with. And it's been interesting to me because I know it from my life. If I had dealt with a lot of things that you have dealt with, or a lot of my black friends have dealt with, I don't know that I would handle that well. But what's interesting is that it's like every day. It's something that you deal with every day, and I would probably lose it if I had to deal with the same sort of prejudice and treatment, especially by getting pulled over or being profiled or those different things. And granted, I had an experience the other week or so ago. Maybe it was just because of how I was dressed, or maybe it was just because of the area of town I went shopping in. But I got followed around the store, and I was just like, well, you profiled the wrong person. I'm just out. I ain't coming back to the store. But I went to 2 different stores, and I won't put them on blast because I don't want us to get in trouble. But 2 different big chain stores, and got followed while I was trying to pick up things. I'm like, and having that experience is like eye opening, because that rubs you the wrong way. That really makes you feel like, why are you following me around? I mean, you don't like my jacket? What's the deal? And I just left the store. I was like, I put everything back, put it right back where I picked it up, and left. I'm like, well, I'm not shopping here. And I thought about it after I calmed down. Like, maybe it's just the area of town I was in. Maybe there's more crime there or more theft there, so they're just on high alert. But still, just having that experience, I was like, I don't like that. Not at all.
And, to that point, that was an experience that you had that basically came down to probably somebody's opinion or somebody's perspective that you didn't belong. You didn't belong where you were for some reason. You didn't fit in. And I think, in terms of the way people experience racism is like that, but on a broader scale. And, and it's just from a different perspective. But yeah, I mean, these kind of things, and even in that point, even somebody looking at you in that moment saying, you don't belong here, you don't fit in, I need to follow you. Even from that perspective, that's, a lack of even understanding of who you are as a person, like, who you are based on something more than just what they saw on the surface. Yep. But in that case, it was what they saw on the surface, and it was something, that they judged you for, and they acted out of that judgment or prejudgment in some kind of way that made you feel unsafe, unwelcome, whatever it was, someplace you got to get out of there for. Speaking of getting out of there,
I guess we better go.
Let's get out of here for a break. We out for a break. Mad Men of Masculinity, 12:20 a.m. in the Mile High City and on the interwebs everywhere. We'll be right back. Boom. And that was a good opening, dude.
Good, because I was stressing this one.
Man nectar. Man nectar.
I still don't like that. I still don't like the tagline.
That's why I do it. That's also why I do that. That's also why I do that, to annoy all y'all out there.
Behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. I like to do stuff that annoy people sometimes. Mm-hmm. Just because.
Yeah.
That's the big brother in me.
Mm-hmm.
It just is, man. I'm sorry. It just is. Just
all right, let's get some
on
the air. And we're back.
Mm-hmm.
Mad Men of Masculinity on KLDC, 12:20 a.m. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going deep today. We're talking about racism in America.
Yeah. The first time I experienced racism, my grandmother, rest in peace, just passed away last week. She used to be a house cleaner. She used to be a housekeeper. And sometimes in the summertime, she would take me to work with her. And so, she never had a driver's license, never been on an airplane, never even been in like the subway, because she just didn't. That was too much for her. So we used to catch the bus like all the way across town. I mean, like all the way across town, man. I don't even remember how long them bus rides were, but it was all the way across town. Anyhow, to like that side of town where people have housekeepers that come and clean the house. So anyhow, so we get off the bus, and where we got off the bus, there was still I mean, I was little, so maybe the distance seemed farther, but it was at least a quarter, a half mile walk from the bus stop to the house where who she worked for. And we were walking, one time through the neighborhood. We didn't have to zigzag too much. We were walking up through the neighborhood, and I just remember this lady was outside of her house, right? I mean, and these are like really big houses, but outside of her house, and this is the kind of neighborhood where there were no sidewalks. Put it that way. Like there's no sidewalks. When you walk down the street, you literally walking down the street. And so, I just remember as we were walking up, past this lady's house on the right, it was on the right side of the street, man, I can visualize it. As we were walking up the street, this lady kind of came outside of her house on her front porch. And she just kind of sat there and watched us as we walked up the street. And not only did she like watch us as we walked up the street, but she started to like gather some of her stuff like on the front porch or whatever, like, gather it kind of closer to the door and just but she watched us pretty much as far as she could from one side to the next. Now, I thought, okay, that was weird. I mean, I was small, but I thought, okay, that was weird. And then, my granny just kind of grabbed my hand and just, kept on walking. And it took me a long time before I realized what that was. But it for me, it was all the way back to, when I was, when I was little, probably even before first grade, that I can experience that first feeling of, like you described in that store, like I didn't belong where I was. And because I didn't belong where I was, it was some kind of scrutiny. It was some kind of, you get some extra looks and some extra eyeballs. And then since then, I've experienced it, man, you talk about getting followed in the stores. I lost track of how many times I got followed in like a Marshall's one time. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, dude, I'm in here buying some flip-flops, man. Ain't no way in the world I'm going to, steal some flip-flops out of Marshall's, man. I mean, anyhow. But, so, and that's, I can go on and on with just different examples and, even with law enforcement, which we'll get into law enforcement later, but I can experience, I had all those experiences, man. But I'm talking going all the way back to when I was little, man, just walking down the street.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I didn't get experience, at least not in that way. I think for me, just because growing up the way I did, living in foreign countries, I got some of that. And because I moved so much, always being the new guy, always feeling like you don't belong, and just kind of figuring out how to maintain. But it was always at it for a different reason. I was an American in Germany, or I was a service member in Turkey, or I was one, a different nationality in a different country. So you still felt out of place, but not because of the color of my skin necessarily. Granted, when I did live in Georgia and Alabama and some places, and went to some of the predominantly black schools, there was some of that. Some of it was, I remember being fourth grade, maybe something like that. And I went to this new school. It was my first time there. I was a new kid, so I was already getting bullied anyway. And then one of the guys was like, "Oh, you honky. Oh, you this." And I'm wanting to defend myself, wanting to say something, but there's not much I could say. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of turned into this thing where there wasn't anything I could really do about it other than either get beat up or run away. So I just ran away and tried to find other friends to squash it. But it's always ignorance. It's always ignorance bias. It's, I don't know who you are. So now at some level I'm afraid. So now I have to attack. Now I have to justify my fear in some way. And I've experienced that quite a bit. I don't know, I was in the advanced classes in school, and then the next year, depending on the teacher, I might have been in the remedial classes or whatever, just depending on how well I got along with the teacher and how much I wanted to do my work. But depending on which one I was in, either way, there was some sort of prejudice or some sort of kind of profiling or bullying that would happen because either, oh, this is a smart kid, he's smart, so we're going to bully him because I feel less than, or whatever the reason was, or, oh, he's in the remedial class, he's a dumb kid, so now I'm putting myself above him. And those are just, they're similar things, but those are all based on something they judged of me for whatever reason. But to have it be just because of the color of your skin walking down the street without knowing anything about you is a whole nother thing. And that's why it's so hard to deal with. It's so hard sometimes to even understand because it's just there. There's not anything you can do about it. but then you're getting judged immediately without anybody even like taking time, like look at your clothes or look at what you're driving or look at, okay, well, there's evidence that this man isn't a gangbanger. There's evidence that this man probably isn't selling drugs. There's evidence he has a job. He's here to buy clothes or flip flops or whatever. So people don't take the time; they just immediately judge.
Yeah, but ironically, so when we moved kind of out of the city and moved out into the suburbs of Maryland, one of these days I get around to asking her why she did it. But so where we live, the apartment complex we lived in, you could go to one of two elementary schools. And one elementary school, there were just two way different elementary schools. One of them was in like, a little neighborhood right outside of College Park, Maryland neighborhoods called University Park. And again, another neighborhood with no sidewalks. A lot of very, successful families and all that kind of stuff. And then the other one was just kind of in a Joe Schmo, whatever neighborhood kind of thing. But for some reason, my mom put me in University Park Elementary School. So, I was probably one of the few black kids in that school. But of my good friends, of my best friends, had one who, dad was a lawyer and, the Jewish family. And man, they welcomed me and they took me on, trips with them and, all this other kind of stuff, man. They just took care of me big time. Another one, his family owned a Chinese restaurant down in Chinatown, and so they were well off. At another one, his dad was like a DC cop, I think it was. But I had this, this real diverse kind of group of friends, and all of those families treated me like I was one of their own kids. So in my middle school and even my high school was very diverse. If you look at my high school yearbook, it can't be much more diverse than that. And so I had a lot, I had a lot of interactions with a lot of different racial backgrounds of people in terms of friends in all my schooling. And so, some of that was just kind of part of the area of DC, but at the same time, I didn't really experience too much of it just amongst friends or whatever once I got into school. And then now, and so I grew up kind of, I can be almost a social chameleon in terms of interacting with people from all different kind of backgrounds, whether it be economically or racially or religiously or any of that kind of stuff, man. So, I've also had a whole lot of experience with people of different racial backgrounds where there was no sense of racism. There was no sense of discrimination. There was no sense of any of that. Like I said, some of these families, man, I was around their house more than they were, as much as their kids were.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I'm really grateful of my upbringing, growing up as Army brat, living in DOU schools and going to different countries. Because when you go to Germany as a kid, or even in the military, you're an American. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. You're all Americans, And yeah, you have different states and different areas of people with different cultures, kind of from different parts of the U.S., but you're just American. And so I had those similar experiences, and it was always shocking to me, especially when I went from Germany to Northern Alabama. And my junior year, that school was very mixed. It was like most of the military kids, like lower middle class white kids, and then there were some of the inner city kids. So we had this nice mix. And so it was really just about, this was our school, this is who we are. You had your friends, you had your cliques, and everything like that. But then my dad got tired of paying rent in the city and decided to buy a place out in the county. So we moved out to the county. And this was a country, school that had Future Farmers of America. I'd never heard of that before. I didn't know nothing about it. And apparently they had race riots every other year or so. And my first year was my senior year. And I remember getting like almost in fights with kids that were trying to like bully me or pick on me or whatever, because they thought, half the school thought I was a freshman because I'm a small little white kid just showed up. So let's pick on him. Luckily, I made friends, and usually, like you said, because I had enough experience with diversity and different people, I could be a chameleon and kind of blend in, and then be like, "Why do you want to mess with me? I didn't know you," and squash the situation. But it's always surprising to me, and it's kind of one of those things where I think you have to sometimes pull off the rose-colored glasses, because it's not our experience where we live normally, but we still have to accept that if you go to certain areas. And I know growing up in the South, when we weren't in Europe, we were in the South. And even some of the terms and some of the things they said, that's just how they were. That's just how they said things, but that's not how they should be saying them. Let me just put it that way. And I think right now it's probably time to stop saying things altogether.
No, it ain't, man. But it's time for a break, though.
That's what I mean.
Boom.
Let's take a break. Stop saying things.
Boom.
So, Man and Masculinity, we're taking a break. Be right back.
After these messages, we'll be right back. Remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know. What was that on? Like one of them cartoons or something
Yeah, it was
like that?
like Hanna-Barbera cartoons or something like that.
Hanna-Barbera. I remember them joints, man. I used to like some Hanna-Barbera, man. Hey, wasn't nothing better than some Hanna-Barbera cartoons with a big old bowl of cereal, man. For real.
Saturday morning, you get up early, you get your big old bowl of cereal.
And in my great-grandmother's house, all we had was Frosted Flakes, man.
Oh, see,
I didn't know they made other kinds of cereal. I didn't know there was other kinds of cereal besides Frosted Flakes.
That's mostly what we ate was Frosted Flakes.
I didn't even know that, man.
Sometimes I'll get into the Fruit Loops and the Apple Jack, stuff like that. But
I ain't even know, man. I didn't even know. And then one day I messed around and saw some Special K at somebody's house. I was like, "Oh, Frosted Flakes."
oh no. I was gonna say, at least you had Frosted Flakes. You didn't have like the bran flakes or whatever that look like Frosted Flakes that you choke on.
Yeah, for real. You got to pour like a half a cup of sugar in that bad boy. Then you get to the bottom of the bowl, be all sugar in the bottom of the milk.
Oh, that was the best.
Yeah, that was the best time. Just get a bowl full of sugar with some milk.
Bowl full of sugar
Boom.
makes the brain go down. Whatever.
Yeah. And we're back.
We're back.
Yeah, we back, man. We back. You know, we was you can tune in on YouTube and check us out in between these breaks where we have some random conversations, man. I'm sure super producer Nikki Nicole is in there like, man, man, these
Talking about cartoons and cereal.
You know what I'm saying? Those were the days though, man. You know, so check us out on Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of stuff, man. Like, subscribe, you know, man, hit that. You can unsubscribe later. You can tell us you hate us. You can tell us you like us. You can tell us what you agree with, what you don't agree with. If you're watching this live, you can comment and live and then on Facebook, and JBK will make you famous. Put your comment right.
Madman Radio on Facebook page. You can comment live on there, and then we'll see if you comment on my page or on Kirk's page. We won't see it till later. So don't be mad at us if we don't say that until later.
Talking about tough topic today. We're talking about race in America, man. Race in America. Relationships. Man, you ever date anybody of a different race?
I did, and let me tell you something.
Date or relationship?
It was different. It was dating. It was
Okay.
dating. And that was the problem, was because this is one of the things I had never experienced and I was ignorant of. I didn't realize that you could get like, I don't even know how to say it, like cross-personal racism, because I was bartending at this restaurant in Alabama after I got out of the military. And there was this girl, she was fine. And we got along, we started dating. She went to Alabama A&M.
Ooh, say no more.
And
if you know, you know. Say no more. She was a sister.
But what I didn't realize was that I had not experienced that if I was dating a sister, the brothers that from that school they were mean mugging me. They would come to the bar and they like make comments and things and give me a hard time, and I was confused. She had to explain it to me. Like, I was so like white ignorant, I didn't even understand. But yeah, it's hard enough to date anyway. It's hard enough to date outside your race, period. But then when you add in like social constructs, because I was getting the side eye from the old white ladies and the younger black guys who were mad that I was dating her and all this stuff, and it's like it was just one of those things where I was kind of like, well, I guess maybe this isn't for me, because it's hard enough to like just try to get to know somebody. Then you add all these other pressures, all these other people all of a sudden in your business, and it's like, I don't know how some folks do it.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's so like I said, I grew up kind of in this real diverse kind of whatever. So from the youngest of age, from the earliest of like quote unquote girlfriends, even when I was little, whatever, I really didn't have like a type, I guess you could say. I mean, you talk about taste the rainbow. I mean, I've been like all the spectrums and colors of the rainbow. And so I've experienced all that kind of stuff, man. And been married twice. My first wife was and still is black. She's a black woman. We met at an HBCU. Shout out Norfolk State University, Alabama and A&M also. But anyhow, and my second wife is white, was and still is white and Native American, but basically white in terms of how she looked and culture and all that kind of stuff. And so it's funny though, with my second marriage, she had never experienced any of that until we got married, or until we actually even started dating. Like, then she would notice, and she brought this up, she would notice that we went out, she would get looks. And that was the first time in her life that she had ever experienced any of that kind of stuff. And obviously, as time has gone on, I think it's generally speaking more and more accepted in terms of interracial dating. But I think you do still get the looks. You probably still get the side eyes probably, these days. And because you're just going to have some of that, you're going to have some of that. Well, why don't you, why you got to go outside of this, and why you got, and all that kind of stuff. And, so I would imagine you still experience some of that stuff. But for the most part, I feel like the younger generations, especially, because nowadays, man, it ain't even, race is kind of like a softball. Now you're talking like, well, what's your sexual orientation, or what's your gender? Are you same-sex relationship? Or are you somebody trans this or trans that? And you got all these different dynamics, people, their identification and how they, you might mess somebody up if you call them he or she. They might, well, no, I don't date a she, I date a they. And so you got so many different dynamics that I think, race is kind of like, man, at least we can understand that.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things. We talked about before about, it seems like today people are just wanting to be offended. So, you throw in race, you throw in transgender, you throw in, whatever their sexual orientation is. And it's like, I think what I did learn from the interracial relationships I had and I saw, the successful ones, was they had a thick skin and they didn't care, and they actually used all the side eyes and all the looks and all the comments as fuel for their, connection. Like every time that happened, instead of driving them apart. Now, I think if I had been with that girl longer, if it hadn't just been like a new thing, like we were just starting to date, and then I get all this, pressure and judgment, and all these different things, it might have been a different story. And I'm like, yeah, let's show them, but because it was new and I was like, I don't know if I can handle all this. It was because it was just a shock to my system. I was not used to that, especially growing up in such a mixed community in the military and overseas and stuff, that coming into that, it was just kind of like, man, how do you deal with this, and how do you even continue with all this pressure and all this judgment? And so in some ways I was just kind of shutting it down, like I don't want to deal with that. And also for all you other white guys out there who don't know, HBCU is a historically black college or university. So just want to throw that out there in case you're like, what did he say? He's speaking advice. I don't understand what he said.
I think a lot of people, if you follow CU or Coach Prime, any of that kind of stuff, I think HBCUs have gotten a lot of pub lately. But yeah, I did throw that out there. Now, thanks for clearing that up for me. My take is, and this is my take, right? People ain't got to agree. I don't care. My take is, if I'm in a relationship with somebody that's not in my race, okay, and if somebody's got a problem with that, they wanna vocalize any of that kind of stuff. First of all, I'm to the point. I've been 50 years old in a couple of weeks, right? Like my care factor is really low these days, to be honest with you. Like I just care less and less about a lot of stuff. But either way, you got those people out there that'll make a big deal about, that kind of stuff. And I look at it like, if you would make a big deal about racial differences in relationship, I bet you, because, okay, let me paint a picture, be more specific. Let's say I'm in a relationship with an Asian woman. If I'm in a relationship with an Asian woman, maybe a black woman, or, well, because I'm black, maybe somebody might say, how come you don't want to, how come you ain't dating a black woman? And so I say, well, what if I was dating a black man? Right. I still wouldn't be dating a black woman, but you wouldn't have the guts to pipe up against that community to say, why, how come you ain't dating a black woman? And you can substitute any race you want in that whole scenario, but I'm just personalizing it, for example. And so I think when it comes to relationships, I think you got to be to the point of, like, man, does this person make you happy? Does this person fulfill you? Is this person a good fit for you, man? Because the world needs love, man. The world needs more love. And, and as far as I'm concerned, man, if love is in it, then who am I to, it is what it is.
Yeah, just leave it alone. We all need more love. Yeah, but one thing I want to bring up, and I wanted to ask you about, because in my experience dating the rainbow, I've dated Asian, Indian, Native American, Pacific Islander, whatever. All these different colors and Latinas. the only relationship I got all the crap for was when I was dating a black girl.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how come I can date all these other races, all these other colors, and it's not a big deal? But when I dated a black girl, it was a big deal.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, do it.
That's the history of America.
Wow.
That's the history of America that you see right there. Because when you deal with black and white, literally, black man, white woman, black man, then you're going back to plantations.
Right.
Then there's all the stigmas of either master's wife, out there messing with the slave, or the master bringing the slave in the house and all that kind of stuff. And so I think you have a lot of those types of things that are underneath the surface when you start talking about specific race of white and black. And so, I think the answer to your question is why there would be more stigma, more side eye, more any of that kind of stuff. I think it's just the history of America.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you don't see it as much now, granted, recently because of whatever the media was throwing out there. We had the Asian hate and all that stuff going on. And granted, during the Gulf War, there was a lot of Middle Eastern, Muslim hate. But that's the thing. It always seems to be media driven. It always seems to be some sort of cultural thing that pushes a lot of this stuff. And what I find is it's mostly just ignorance. Yeah. I mean, even our number one fan, Janine, posted, it's ignorance passed down generation to generation. Hurts my heart how other people are to each other. I totally agree, because everything that we're talking about is this passed down ignorance. And we've seen time and time again when somebody's brave enough to go to that other person, to go to that other race and talk to them person to person, man to man, you will find out that you are more alike than you are different. But it takes a little bit of bravery. And what I'm finding is most Americans just deep down are just fearful cowards. They don't want to. Plus, of course, granted, if it's passed down generation to generation, if it's a family thing, then now if they want to be open-minded, they'll be open-hearted, they want to connect. Now they're going against this family tradition. And more times than not, with most human beings, when you challenge a belief system, when you challenge something that they just believe or that is ingrained in them, they become more entrenched, not less. Because now whatever they believe, they think that's who they are. And it's sad because what they're basically saying is, I'm ignorant and I want to be ignorant. Don't challenge my ignorance and try to make me aware and smarter and more accepting of other people, because this is how I define myself.
Yeah, I mean, it was the ignorance, and it was the hatred, and it was the superiority, all those kinds of things that mix it all up in a bowl. All of that stuff was the early racism in America, right? And so that type of, I'm talking America specific, right? Let's just be real. Let's just be honest, right? That type of racism from some white Americans back then were the bane of why black people had the experience that we had, not even just through racism, but then Reconstruction and, Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement and all these other kind of things. That was the ignorance of a population of white people, mainly, well, not even mainly, of white people that caused that. At the same time, or maybe not even at the same time, but in the same context, there were a lot of white people that were involved in the Civil Rights Movement. Yep. There were a lot of white people that shed blood in the Civil Rights Movement. And so there were a lot of good people that put their skin on. You looking at that Edmund Pettus Bridge, that front line of people had white and black people linked arms, right? And so, so it was, out of the goodness or lack of ignorance and lack of hatred of some white people that helped things become more, I'm going to say more equal compared to, prior to the Civil Rights Movement. We got a long way to go, still a long work in progress, but at the same, so we can't just say all black people are this and all white people are that. We can't do that. We won't make progress. We can't make the other side our enemy. I mean, because the only way we're going to move this thing together, especially just as a country, man, as a country, and then as a world, is, man, we got to come together to solve some of these problems that we have, and we can't do it if they are the enemy. If I look on the other side of the screen and I see, a face that's paler than mine, and say, man, you the enemy. Well, wait a minute. How are we going to be the home for healthy masculinity from your perspective and my perspective? Because there's people with my experience and people with your experience that need to come together to solve some of these problems that we have.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because what we have talked about, what I've talked about quite a bit, is that the divide and conquer mentality that they use to control us, that the powers that be, whatever, keep us all enslaved to some degree, is by pitting us against each other. You know, it's white versus black, it's men versus women, it's, you know, gay versus straight, it's, you know, everything. We're all being pitted against each other, and they're just striking a flame of hate. And we have to douse that with our own love and coming together and realize it's not us versus them. We're all us. This is the human race. We're all on the same planet. We're standing across imaginary lines of race and nationality, things like that, going, oh, it's us versus them. It's because of them. But it's not.
Yeah.
And if we, especially if like white people in this country came together, joined forces with all the other races and just became Americans together, we could change this country for the better almost instantaneously. We could change the government, we could change the banking, we could change everything together. But we first got to accept the fact that we have to accept some hard truths that, yes, these things exist, but we need to move past them. And, you know, by accepting, like, hey, my man right here, when I do this show with who I love, who's my best friend, has to deal with these issues, and I have to be aware of that and compassionate to his experience, and vice versa. And we come together by explaining those things and talking about those things. So,
boom. Hey, we'll be right back. KLDC 1220 AM in the Mile High City, on the interwebs everywhere. Madmen of Masculinity. All right, I'm going to freeze my screen because I need to look up something real quick.
You look up. I got to run the bathroom so bad.
Word, you got to go?
I got to go.
If you're watching this live, JBK got to go potty. That means we're going to talk about him when he's gone.
Very nice.
I'm going to talk about him. I'm going to talk about him. His feet stink. Oh, way his feet stink. Breath stink, feet stink, underarms stink. Man. No, I'm kidding. He's going to watch this back later. Oh, why you do that, man? That's what happens when you leave me driving a school bus and you ain't here. Boom. All right, back to that. And he's got the control panel on his side. So if you comment right now, I can't see it until he comes back and puts it on the screen. But if you comment that his feet stink, we'll see what it says when he comes back. Boom. Good stuff. Super producer Nikki Nicole, how you doing?
I'm good.
Are you good?
I'm actually ahead of the game for the week.
Uh-oh.
So I'm real good.
You're ahead of the game.
I'm ahead of the game. I started my day at like 4:30 this morning. I got everything done before I left for the gym at 9. I worked out with a personal trainer for an hour. I got here. I already had stuff already done for the week. So I'm like way ahead of the game.
Wow. Man, you got all your poop in the group.
It's the nice weather.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. See, we're out of the Arctic freeze and the Arctic blast, and now we can get back to regular Colorado weather.
Yeah, exactly. You can just kind of like slowly start to feel spring gonna be hitting soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And it's funny too, because every time, I mean, for me personally, when I drive past a golf course, I'm like, ooh, man. And I think, sometimes we can take it for granted. Like in the summertime, last summer I didn't even think or appreciate, man, it's going to be cold and snowy and we're not going to be able to get out here in the beautiful weather. And, I just took it for granted.
Yeah, I think I end up doing that every year.
I think that's the thing. I think we totally just take it for granted. And if you're a snowbird, take that for granted too, that the summertime is blah, blah, blah. Here he comes. Y'all don't tell him what I said. Don't tell him what I said, for real.
I ain't worried about you.
I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Boom. All right, you ready? And we're back. Back.
Man,
Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Madmen of Masculinity, KLDC 1220 AM in the Mile High City and on the interwebs everywhere. Shout out Crawford Broadcasting.
Yes, thank you for letting us in the door.
Shout out Crawford Broadcasting. Support local radio, people.
Man,
like for real, support local radio. I mean, if somebody has a sponsor or advertise, just call up the advertiser and say, thank you for supporting local radio. You know what I mean? That's important. You know, everybody and their grandmama got a podcast. We do this on podcast, but let's support local radio. You know what I mean? There's people involved here, staffs and all this other kind of stuff. Just like support local businesses, support local radio.
Yeah, if you don't like hearing commercials and stuff, you know, you can go to CPR and listen to them, but then they do their drive and stuff like that, asking for money. This is how things go.
Yeah.
If you want to be able to get in your car, turn on the radio, and listen to it for free, somebody got to pay the bills.
Right.
Speaking of paying the bill, if you like what we do here, if you like the topics we talk about, you like the movement that we're pushing here, call us up.
Yeah.
We've got opportunities for advertising and sponsorship.
Mm-hmm. Holla at your boys. We'll make you famous. We'll make you famous.
Yes.
Because we talk about real stuff. You know, we talk about fun stuff. We have you can go back and look at all the past shows, listen to all the past shows. We got a lot of fun stuff. We got a lot of fun topics. We thought, you know, all kinds of stuff. Anything having to do with, you know, with healthy masculinity. Last time we were talking about, you know, a man, you know, being a king and having a castle, blah, blah, blah. And just, we talk about all kinds of stuff, man. So, you know, this one, but at the same time, we got to have some medicine with the sugar, right? At the same time, we got to be able to get serious about some stuff. So these are the kind of things that are important, man. And today we're talking about race in America.
Racism in America is a thing.
It's a very big thing.
That was something we were talking about before that I want to kind of bring up because we were going to touch on law enforcement and all that.
Yep.
Also, I think a lot of times in this whole divide and conquer culture of the news media and everything else trying to keep us apart rather than together, they use these things. They'll promote these things to get us more separate, get us, you know, away from actually having conversations and joining together. You know, a lot of times, though, if something happens that they know is going to get people up in arms, they're going to promote that. And so you get a lot of times it just fans the flame of ignorance and fear that, oh, well, that group of people, they do those things because look at the news, they keep promoting these things when this group of people does those things.
Yeah.
And it's something you got to be aware of when you turn on the news. You have to ask yourself, what are they trying to promote? What is the agenda they're pushing? And most of the time you can break it down to divide and conquer. They're trying to divide us as a people. They're trying to divide us as a nation because it makes us easier to control and easier to manipulate.
You know, it's funny you bring it up. I was actually in DC or the DC area last week. Again, you know, grandmother passed away and that sort of stuff. So while I was back there in DC, you know, this whole thing came up in Memphis. You know, this Tyree Nichols. Yeah. You know, I mean, the news flash was another black man you know, he's killed, you know, by police and, you know, et cetera, and all that kind of stuff. And then they bring on the police chief, black lady, and she's like, you know, she's saying, you know, this is terrible, this is rough, and when the video comes out, it's going to be horrific, and it's a mix between Rodney King and Emmett Till, and she prepared everybody for the video that came out, and then in the middle of all that, you know, because of the baseline in terms of what we experience, well, there's what might arguably be the dispensability of, you know, of the black male in terms of law enforcement, or at least perceived that way. But then we also hear the narrative over and over again that, you know, white cops did this, white cops did that, blah, blah, blah. Then it comes out that there's 5 black cops that did this thing. And so then we all kind of have to pause and be like, wow, didn't see that one coming, you know, and then it's like, man, then is it a greater thing of just a law enforcement kind of thing, or how do black people see ourselves, you know? And I don't like the whole idea of using that word amongst ourselves, you know, in music and in entertainment and all that kind of stuff. I don't like that, like, because to me that reinforces, you know, some kind of negative title, or negative stereotype, negative trope that's put on us. And I think maybe, you know, to some degree, you know, we even have to look at ourselves in terms of racism. Some of the most racist people against black people that I've known in my life were black people. I mean, man, I mean, and again, in our culture, you know, you hear that word from black people, I mean, all the time, like, oh, that's our word. No, that ain't our word. And so, you know, but in terms of law enforcement, you know, these are the kind of things that we got to wonder if that those stereotypes, those racial biases even go deeper than just a profession. I will tell you, though, I truly, on a day-to-day basis, not only do I recognize that when I get pulled over is one thing, but I got a black son, man. And I'm, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't want to be next. I don't want to have Al Sharpton speaking at my son's funeral. I don't. I mean, but I worry about that, man. I worry about what could happen, you know, when he's walking down the street and somebody just assumes something about him that is far from true, man. But law enforcement is a very big thing, man. And we've seen here, in Memphis that we can say law enforcement, but it's not even with that. It's not even a baseline white-black thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I mean, you get in statistics, and it's unfortunate that black men are 3 times more likely to get killed by police. But one of the things that's, we've been noticing is that there's a lot more media coverage on black killings, because there are white men who get killed by police as well, and you almost never hear their names. You almost never hear coverage, and I'm always curious about that. Like, maybe you'll hear it in the local news, but it's never a national news story. But I think it's because it doesn't inflame people, and maybe it's just a white thing, because a lot of white people are like, if you're not in my family, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. We don't join up. But the black community will come together very quickly. And sometimes I feel like there's some manipulation going on, because they'll promote these things and it gets everybody inflamed. Black, white, Asian, everybody's like, this is wrong. And then other times they're like, oh, well, the same thing's happening in this other community. Nothing. Asian community, Latin community, white community, whatever. And you don't hear anything about it. So, like, what is the manipulation that's going on? What are they trying to do to inflame? And we need to have news media talking about these things. We need to be talking about it. Why is it always just focused solely on the black community?
I think, kind of like relationships, I think it goes back to the history of this country. I think, black men being hung from a tree was like a normal thing. I mean, not a normal thing, but in some areas it was, and so I think it goes back to, we have been hunted historically in our country, and we're not. I mean, we're 3 generations away from that, maybe 4 generations away from that. I mean, so we're not talking a long time ago. I mean, Emancipation Proclamation was 1865. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in our parents' generation, was there segregation?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, my mom was 13 at the March on Washington when she went. I mean, and so we're not so far away that we can assume that all of that is in the past and all that doesn't exist anymore. So I think what you just said, to me, when I hear that, I think some of that goes back to the history of our country of a certain color and a look, a certain demographic of a person hanging from a tree as a spectacle. Like, everybody come out and watch this. I mean, you got pictures of this stuff, historical pictures of it was a spectacle. And so maybe, subconsciously in our culture, it's a spectacle.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. I was just asking the question, like, why do we put so much onus on that? Which, I mean, it makes total sense. I think in my experience, especially because of the way I grew up and having so many interracial friends and just multicultural friends, that there is a whole lot of white guilt where you're like, I know I didn't participate in that, but that my lineage, especially coming from the South. And I remember we had my grandparents come to visit us in Germany, and having my grandfather, who I thought was the sweetest man in the world, but because of when he grew up and where he grew up, that word was something he just used normally. It wasn't a thing to him. And he described some girl on the TV. Oh, she's a, pretty whatever. And I was just heartbroken. Like, I mean, my mouth dropped, and I'm looking at my dad, and he's just like, he's just old. Like, that's just the way they are. But I was just like, and you're right, it's not that far gone from us. So it's something to keep in mind, but it's something that we need to discuss. Yeah. I mean, I even wanted to bring up, Morgan Freeman talking about Black History Month, and his like, he's like, we're talking about racism, we need to stop. I'll have to find that clip and see exactly how he worded it. He's like, no, I don't want a Black History Month. He was talking to the newscaster, and he's like, do you want a White History Month? He's like, no, well, I don't want a Black History Month. So that just continues the separation of us as different colors, and we need a month. Yeah.
In my experience growing up, that story, that narrative was not included in textbooks. Right. I haven't been in school in a long time. I don't know if it is today, but I know that narrative, that part of our country's history was not included in textbooks, outside of the fact that, in February, we talked about these kind of things. We talked a little bit about the civil rights movement and all that other kind of stuff. And so a lot of people right now have a problem with the whole 1619 thing and, and all this other kind of stuff. And I think, if we can get to the point where we accept our past, but not be bound by it, then we'll be free in our future. If we accept, yes, this happened, You know, I mean, we accept this happened in the lineage of our country. This is where we came from, right? Here's where we are, but let's come together to figure out where we want to go. We don't have to be who we were. I don't have to hold you guilty for something that your grandfather or great grandfather said or did. At the same time, I can say, okay, how can we work together going forward to make this thing a whole lot better? Because like I said, you know, man, you know, until black people stop shooting black people, killing black people, and of course every race kills, you know, each other based on proximity. But at the same time, I think, you know, we need to hold ourselves accountable. I went to a historically black college. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to move forward, to stop using derogatory words towards each other that as a term of endearment in one example. But at the same time, come together, especially men leading this thing. You know, men are the tip of the spear, man. And when we come together and we sit down and have these conversations, and when we accept each other's experience and perspective and say, okay, how do we go forward from here? What can we do to make this thing better?
I mean, you bring up the greatest point, because that's one thing they did in Germany. They did not hide their past. They taught their past so that all the kids knew what had happened. They knew about World War II. They knew about the Holocaust. They knew what happened. They knew about the Nazi regime. So it wasn't buried. So they're very aware of that. They're very conscious of not going down that path again. And you know, if we don't learn from our past, we're doomed to repeat it. And so we need to have these conversations ongoing so that we can change the narrative, change our futures, and change our hearts and minds moving forward.
Well, you know, several years ago, like 9 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, real quick, I went to Rwanda. In Rwanda, they have genocide memorials and museums, and I mean, like in graphic ways that we would never have these kind of. I mean, you walk in and you still see like the bodies. I mean, it's a trip, right? And so, but at the same time, you know, they had an outright genocide where the Tutsis and the Hutus had to come together after that and heal and reconcile. And now, man, Rwanda is such a beautiful country, man, with the energy and man, the vibe, and man, there's so much love in that country, but they had to heal the wounds and they had to reconcile that thing. They had to forgive and they had to move forward. And you're talking an African country where, you know, the two populations, like I said, the Hutus and the Tutsis, after the genocide, man, they didn't forget it. You can literally still go there today and see the bodies. I mean, you can literally still go there and see that. So they didn't forget it. They're very open with it. And if anything, it's a reminder of who we were, but it galvanizes them to never want to go back there again. And so I think, you know, again, as men, healthy masculinity, we got to be willing to lead this conversation and have these talks, reach out to people who are not like you, learn about them, you know, empathize, you know, just respect where people's perspectives are coming from, and let's bring this thing together.
Yeah. Remember, if you don't understand, just say, I don't understand. It's okay if you don't know. If I don't know, I don't know. Just ask questions. Come together and make sure you get on, listen to us Saturdays at 8 a.m., Wednesdays at 6. Go on YouTube, like and subscribe, hit that bell icon so you know when we're posting again. And until next time, Madmen
Out.